much for inviting me. Can you all hear me at the back? Yeah. It's not bad in here actually, is it? So it's, right, we've heard a bit of the history today, so now we're just going to delve into the archaeological side of things because it's a lot more specific, put it that way. You can interpret it whichever way you want, but basically it's what you find in the ground. So, I'm going to be talking about the Battle of Towton, as we've heard, but it's going to be more condensed. You'll see in a minute. So, following the excavation and publication of the details from the Towton mass grave in '96, I advised caution regarding the notion of simply accepting the former interpretations of our historic battlefields, and this applies to all of our historic battlefields. And as some of you will know, the historical interpretations are a little bit flexible, to say the least. So, 30 years later, what have we learned? And one of the basic questions I'm hoping to answer today is, what is the archaeological evidence of the Battle of Towton? When I first started this 30 years ago, I wish I'd stop saying that, it sounds so 30 years ago, I and a lot of other people thought that this was it. Lord Dacre's tomb in Saxon churchyard was possibly the only physical evidence of the Battle of Towton. Well, guess who might be about to change that as well? So anyway, we'll think about that later. Another thing we need to make clear for this talk is which area is generally covered by the phrase, the Battle of Towton. And as we've heard today, that's flexible as well. I'm going to caveat this by saying that in 2010, I wrote a paper about this very subject, called Killing Time, Challenging the Common Perceptions of Three Medieval Conflicts, Ferrybridge, Dintingdale, or Sherburn, and Towton. I believe that the primary sources suggest that the conflicts at Ferrybridge, Dintingdale or Sherburn and Towton were fought over what would now be perceived as a single day. And that's what this paper is about, so I suggest you go and read that if you want to argue with that. Somebody's nodding their head. That is in a modern time frame from 12 noon, or 12:01, however you want to put it on, the 29th of March, until midnight. That's our modern time frame. But the medieval time frame was different. Again, the paper outlines how we discuss that. So therefore, one interpretation is that the primary sources initially referred to all three engagements as the Battle of Ferrybridge. That's all they called it, the Battle of Ferrybridge. Beginning before dawn, and therefore the former 28th of March, well, when people talk about the 28th of March in the medieval period, they thought it was a different date to our 28th of March, and at Ferrybridge, and ended at Towton on the 29th of March. The whole engagement was sometimes referred to as Palm Sunday Field, a reference to time and not to space, and only later as the Battle of Towton, as we've heard this morning. For the purpose of this discussion, I will be talking about one part of this conflict, the battle near Towton. You'll see why it's near Towton. I'm covering all bases here. And as you've heard again earlier, the Act of Attainder from 1461 quite clearly states that on Sunday called Palm Sunday, on the 29th day of March, the first of his reign, in a field between the towns of Sherburn in Elmet and Tadcaster, in the said shire of York, called Saxon Field and Towton Field. So there's lots of ways of interpreting that, but one of them for today I will interpret it this way. On Palm Sunday, the 29th of March 1461, in a field or battle area between the two recognisable towns, you've got to put it somewhere. If you're talking to people from abroad or in London, you've got to put it in a space. In the towns between Sherburn and Elmet and Tadcaster, so one end and the other end, called Saxon Field and Towton Field, that is in the fields of two settlements. So as this shows on a map that I made for a journal article in 2003, here are the fields of Towton and Saxon. Now specific things you can highlight about this map. For example, the highlights in red is Whitehill Field and Saxton Field and Westfield, and these are medieval type or earlier field names. But as you notice in Towton, there aren't any. So what does that say about Towton as opposed to Saxton? But also on this map, for example, there is Handley, Dintingdale, what people in 1849 recognised as Dintingdale, and also, as we'll see later, North Acres Field. Now, was that an official field name, or is that a more modern field name, or just a general area? Because it was in the northern acres of Saxton. And there, as the red line shows, is the modern-ish boundary. Again, it'd be interesting to find out when that boundary turns up. That's now the parish boundary of Towton and Saxton. And as you can see, Saxton sits south of that, Towton is north, and that'll turn up later. But in terms of the battlefield, that's the general area I'm going to be talking about. And this isn't new either, because in the 18th century, Thomas Jeffrey produced this map, which is the general map of the area, and as you've seen before earlier, he highlights the graves in Towton Field, between the two settlements. He's not alone in that everybody who came afterwards produced maps about the Battle of Towton, and they usually put it in this location, between the villages of Towton and Saxton, with the valley, Towtondale, between them. And this map, by Ledman in 1889, is quite useful because it's got most of the features that most people talk about when they discuss the Battle of Towton. Some more than others. For example, we've got Lord Dacre's Cross, which I'll be discussing. We've got Towton Dale. We've got Lord Dacre's Bird Tree, which we'll be discussing, and we've got Lord Dacre's Tomb, for example. So all those, I can't do all those today, so I'll try and discuss a few key pieces that I think are relevant for today. But why did we begin the Towton Battlefield Archaeology Project in 1996? Well, that was because in September of 96, we discovered or uncovered the mass grave, as you can see here, next to Towton Hall. And at that time, a book had just come out by Andrew Boardman called The Battle of Towton, and that was the acknowledged book to go to discuss anything and all things Towton. Really good book. Unfortunately now it's been slightly superseded by what we've found since then. Not Andrew's fault, because you can't you can't write a book before it's all known about. But the information that was available to Andrew, which was limited, was obviously seen in a certain light. And one of the pieces of information that everybody gets, and one of the sources that people get information from, are from newspapers and journals and gossip and this, that and the other. And some of that is what I'll be discussing today. But here's a classic. How does the information become incorrect in the first place? Well, this is a newspaper article from 1996, just before we found the mass grave. And this is when the builders had just recovered the first half of the mass grave, and they put all the human remains in that box and put them into Saxon churchyard. And they say there, the fact that Towton Hall was a billet, or sleeping quarters, for Lancashire soldiers during the battle. Now that was a fact according to the newspaper. There's only one problem with that, and that's Towton Hall now, and it dates to the 17th century. So it wasn't even built. So we've got this information that everybody's taken as gospel, and it's completely, it couldn't be more wrong when the building wasn't even there in the first place. And this isn't alone. I've gone through every single piece of that information that I've highlighted in that list, and an awful lot of it is not quite as it should be. One of the other classics is this thing, known as the Towton Battle Axe, as Andrew Boardman named it in his book in 1994. And this is now in Alnwick Castle in Northumberland. and it's called the Towton Battle Axe. Guess what?
He didn't.
It was found, this is a quote, it was found very many years ago in the bed of the River Cock. It was purchased by Colonel Grant at Saxton from the wife of a miller. I would say that was a very shrewd miller. Because when I wrote a paper about it in 2015, I compared it with all other weapons at the time, discussed it with the Royal Armouries, and we came up with the fact that it is identical to a halberd. Halberd that's been chopped down, as you can see by the version I made on the left of the one in the middle. And it's identical, absolutely identical. But this is a halberd. Not only that, it is not alone. There are several halberds identical to this one. And not only that, are they English?
No.
No. They're Swiss. So they've got halberd from Switzerland, but surely somebody has taken it over there to use at the Battle of Towton. Possibly not, because it looks like it's 16th century, according to everybody in the Royal Armies. And they're saying, yeah, there's no way that is 1461. So, that's another piece of information that we're told is dogma, that's it. And is it an incorrect date, or are we getting this wrong? Are those halberds a lot earlier than everybody on the planet thinks so far, considers? At the moment, the jury's out, but I would suggest it's probably more later, in which case some shrewd miller has sold this artefact to a local visiting dignitary. This happens a lot on battlefields around the world. You want to come and visit my battlefield? I just happen to have this in a drawer. Would you like to buy it off me? And it still happens today, believe it or not. So there were so many false or incorrect pieces of information related to the conflict that what is fact and what is fiction was far from clear. Now this is 1996. So remaining objective through all this sea of quagmire of misinformation is quite important. So what are the facts? Let's go back to this map again. So let's look for areas of definite archaeological evidence from the battle. And this is what I've collected from 1996 to 2026. So we first look at the place called Saxonfield and Towtonfield, remember, from the Act of Attainder. And the evidence is primarily from Towton, I'll show you why, from North Acres, from the centre of battlefield, just in the area of land between Towton Fields and Saxon Fields, and also from Saxton. But the reason it's in Saxton is different as well. It's done something weird to my slide, but anyway. In 1996, jump back a fraction, the builders knocked this garage down. It's squished the top slide slightly, but look on the one on the right below. That garage was knocked down in 1996 by builders, and that's when they found that mass grave. So in July 96, they dug footings for a foundation trench where that black square is, and they found some human remains, and those are the ones that were buried earlier. And then in September we come along and we excavate that area, and that's the mass grave that we're talking about, and that's this one here. So there's the two graves at Town Hall and the new extension, why they cut the grave in half and how come they found the mass grave that we found in 1996. So we can now start to answer some basic questions. Are the weapon injuries on the skeletons in the mass grave similar to those from a 15th century conflict? If they're covered in gunshot wounds, we know they're not right. Right. Well, everybody's checked it. These were the individuals, the skeletons who were compared to the skeleton of Richard III. That's why they said so much about Richard III, because of these very skeletons, basically. Because we knew so much about medieval weapon trauma, because we'd already analysed this assemblage. And it's perfect for mid-15th century conflict. And if you spread the distribution, this is not one poor individual, this is all of the information put onto a set of skulls, and that shows the distribution of all the blade wounds and everything else. Absolutely perfect for 15th century conflict. So this is the crucial thing, what is the date of the human remains from the 1996 masquerade? So as archaeologists, we do radiocarbon dating, and the date comes, this was a very old date, we could probably make it slightly fine-tuned now, but it's basically 1440 to 1640 on a 95% probability, but more likely 1450 to 1520 at a slightly reduced probability. It's in the right place. It's not 12th century, it's not 20th century or whatever. So those are, at the time, approximately correct. There's nothing wrong with that either. Another question, are there any other burials associated with conflict in the vicinity of the masquerade? And the answer is yes, there are lots of them. And all these burials are primary burials, they've not been moved. They've all got finger bones, they've all got everything else, so it shows that the bodies rotted in situ and were never moved. So as you can see, there are more than, there's two, oh, I can't use a pointer on this. There's two individuals lying underneath the wall, and there's some another triple grave and a mass grave in what was the dining room of Towton Hall. Do all of the skeletons exhibit evidence of weapon trauma? Yes, except one. And that's because, oh, yeah, move my circle as well. That should be over the blue skeleton next to it. For some reason it's squishing my slides, weird. But that skeleton there, in fact, I think, yes, I got this slide. The reason he doesn't show or exhibit any evidence of weapon trauma is because he's half buried underneath the wall. So he probably does, but we don't know, and we're not going to take Towton Hall down to find out. But we were lucky because that was in 2002, and in 2003, oh sorry, yeah, it's about half a metre below the soil, so it's quite deeply buried, and as you can see, half of him, or from the pelvis down, is underneath the wall, so we couldn't get any significant evidence of trauma from him. And he's still there, he's still buried there. And in 2003, we excavated this skeleton here, that lies next to the mass grave, and we were fortunate enough because in the excavation, you see where the foundation trenches of the hall are. There was a hole actually in the foundation. We reached through, and there was the back of his skull was still there. They'd moved the skull, most of the skull, when they built Towton Hall, but they'd left a significant piece of his skull behind, and that had weapon trauma on it. So that's definitely another one. And then in 2005, we excavated inside the dining room of Towton Hall, and all these individuals have got very severe weapon trauma. So all these individuals have got weapon trauma on them. But this is the one, obviously, it was inside the building at the time. We took up the floorboards, we had to leave the joists there. We came down onto the old soil surface, and as you can see there by the collection of stones in the southeast corner of the room, these individuals, the graves of these individuals are even obvious before we'd excavated them, and when we did they look like those. So again, 4 more individuals inside the hall. We know that these are dated to a time before the construction of the hall, because here we can see the red line shows the foundation trenches of Towton Hall, and that cuts or supersedes the cut of the grave of the individual with a skeleton in it. So we can say that Towton Hall post-dates every single skeleton So let's have a look at some of the other elements connected to the conflict. Now this is where some of the authors go a little bit crazy and their interpretations start to go a little bit wild, but we'll try and restrict it all a little bit, and we'll explain how we know what we know today. So we go back to Ledman's map, and he highlights, as well as the early Ordnance Survey map at the top left, the stump of the birch tree from which Lord Dacre was shot. So basically we're talking about the legend of a tree. We're talking about the Battle of Towton, and yet we're now talking about the legend of a tree in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. So what's this about? Well, if you go to Glover from 1585, so it was an old tree, it was an old story, Glover stated that, quote, "This Lord Dacre was slain by a boy at Towton Field, which boy shot him out of a bird tree," it's an elder tree for foreigners, "when he had unclasped his helmet to drink a cup of wine, in revenge of his father, whom the said Lord had slain before, which tree hath been remarkable ever since by the inhabitants, and decayed within these few years." That means it's already dead. Ben Glover got there. "The place where he was slain is called the North Acres, whereupon they have this rhyme. The Lord Dacre was slain in North Acres." Did he put those two together just because it rhymed or what? I don't know. But anyway, we'll see if seen him in. Glover might not even have seen that tree because it was already dead when he was there in 1584. So presumably the tree, or the legend of the tree, is even older than this. That's quite an old story. Does it mean anything? The legends of the deaths in battle of Lord Dacre and Lord Clifford are almost interchangeable.
Yes.
Both removed their helmets and gorgets to drink. We're not talking about fact here, we're talking about stories. Both allegedly removed their helmets and gorgets to drink. Both were killed by an arrow to the throat. Dacre was allegedly killed in Towtondale. Clifford was allegedly killed in Dintingdale, separated by only a few hundred metres. Neither were taken away from the battlefield, both were allegedly buried close by. We have to ask why. Why has somebody not gone and taken the Lord of the Realm and picked him up and taken him home? Dacre was allegedly buried at Saxon Church, which lies in the same valley as the mapped Dintingdale. And Clifford was allegedly buried in an unknown grave somewhere on the battlefield. The stories are almost interchangeable. These stories have several common elements. Death of a leading combatant, Lord Dacre or Lord Clifford, death by arrow, burial near Saxton. Those are the key elements of the stories. There is one place on the battlefield which has links to all three elements, and that is the stump of the birch tree. Why do I say this? Well, the story says it's connected to an arrow, he was shot. It's connected to Lord Dacre's, a combatant, a person, a dead person, who's slain in North Acres, so it's related to death. Death of a leading aristocrat by an arrow. What does that mean? Is there any archaeological evidence of these in this area? Guess what? There's lots of it. Because Simon Richardson's survey, Simon metal detected this area, significant areas of it, and I recorded them all on a mapping program. And he came across with all those blue dots are medieval arrowheads. Very specific type. They're all concentrated, one in what appears to be a line across the top, but also in this concentrated area there. So what we wanted to do then is we wanted to investigate, one, the arrowheads, and two, the locations. So first of all, we took every single arrowhead and we took them to the Royal Armouries in Leeds. And they photographed them, x-rayed them, drew them, and then started hacking them to pieces with machines and grinders and everything else, because, before I mention that, these have been analysed and compared to very few other medieval arrowheads. And these match the Tewkesbury finds, as well as a head from Norwich Castle, Barbican, and 2 examples from the River Avon, all mid-15th century. So the arrowheads are right as well. But not only that, when the Royal Armouries and David Starley got his hands on them, he started cutting them open and grinding them and analysing scientifically. And what he found was they were covered in copper alloy brazing. It's basically copper brazing. So instead of blacksmith beating these out of a single piece of iron, these were brazed together. And nobody, not one single person, knew that or had forgotten it before we found these arrowheads. And I had a 2-hour-long conversation with the actor Robert Hardy, who was the authority on the longbow, and he said, "I don't believe you." And I said, "You don't have to believe me, this is archaeology. I've got the evidence." And eventually came round to it. He was absolutely fascinated. Now it's acknowledged that this is a standard way of making medieval arrowheads under certain conditions, which is weird for a great many reasons, and there's papers coming out on this and everything, so I won't go into that. So the arrowheads are right, in the right period, and we're learning things from the arrowheads as well. So in 2010, in order to double check that Simon wasn't a magician, and he was the only person on the whole planet who could find medieval arrowheads, we took my colleagues and friends from the University of Glasgow. They brought a team of other metal detectorists and surveyors and everything down here, and they did the same area, and they started finding them as well. So these can be found by other metal detectorists, and that was a double check to make sure that we knew what we were doing, how we were doing it, and other people could do it as well. Oh, and we found 7 more during that. It was about a quarter of a day. We found 7 more arrowheads. So now we've got a landscape full of arrowheads and a concentrated area of arrowheads, and covered by the red dots there. So we put a geophysical survey grid over it, and we were trying to find out why is there this concentration of arrowheads. Not only that, but that's moved as well, that's rather annoying, but that actually should be slightly further down. It's moving all these things. Anyway, you can see, if I do that, that should be over that collection of squares, that collection of arrowheads. So there is a square in the landscape made up of nothing but arrowheads that we found archaeologically. So what's that about? So we did a geophysical survey over that area, hoping to find some sort of identifying marks or whatever. And that's what the geophysical survey showed. And there are features in there for all sorts of things, but there's nothing obvious that would highlight graves or anything specific by looking at that, apart from these. That's medieval ridge and furrow, and it's avoiding the corner of this field. So why is that happening? Why are they not ploughing the corner of a field?
Tree.
So not only that, but why we move the dot again. Right, there's something going on here. Anyway, while we were doing that survey, Simon found that distal ulnar, so that bit of a forearm, and I bet it's moved this next dot as well. Yes, it has. I don't know what that means, but anyway. While I was doing that survey, actually carrying out the resistivity survey, I found 2 teeth on the surface. So we have got human remains in the corner of that field. Let's move the line again, so you can't see where the grave was, but I put a 4 metre by 1 metre trench over where we found the human teeth. And that came up with this. Oh, it's staying in the same place, hasn't it? That dotted line is the edge of a pit. If you look at the archaeological drawing as my line, the line's in the same place. That's the edge of a pit. Inside the pit are countless bones. There was over 300 in a square metre, including this one, which was joined, and it's the distal, I've got a slide here, It's the radius and ulna from the lower arm. That was the only lung bone that we found in the whole of that test pit. But it was full of human remains. Most of them small bones from the hands and the feet. We found almost complete hands, almost complete feet. No skulls, no lung bones apart from those two you just saw there. And so that's a general assemblage of the type of bones and the size, and all those are little bones and hands and feet, a couple of spine bones, etc. But what's important is that in 1857, Brooke, in his description of the battlefield, wrote this: "In the month of August 1774, a man was living in Saxton who, with many others, had been concerned in opening the graves of the warriors slain at the Battle of Towton to justify the curiosity of some gentlemen. On a strict examination of the bones, then found it appeared that the least decayed were the bones of the thumbs and the fingers." That's all they found. They weren't the least decayed, they were the only bones they found, which is very odd. Drake, in 1736, wrote, about a year or two ago, so that's pre-1736, two gentlemen and myself had the curiosity to go and see a fresh grave opened in these fields, where amongst the quantities of bones, though he found bones as well, we found some arrow piles, so we got arrowheads, pieces of broken sword, and 5 very fresh groped pieces of Henry the 4th, 5th and 6th coins. He's finding bones and arrowheads. But that's not all. On the 31st of July in 1851, on the occasion of one of my visits to Towton Field, Brooke was informed by the wife of a farmer named Lorne, who was formerly occupied as tenant, part of the field of battle, that a youth belonging to the family had not long previously found there and brought to him the finger bones of a man. That's 3 occasions where people are going delving into the middle of the battlefield and finding human bones. Not only that, but if you go field walking today, and Nadia Neff did a master's degree on all this for forensic work she was doing, you still find human remains on the surface, and there are always little finger bones and the teeth, human teeth. So there are still teeth to be found. What does it mean? That's where the graves are. The grave pit, as described in the Richard III 1483 grant, says their bodies were notoriously left on the field, thoroughly outside the ecclesiastical burial place, in 3 hollows. So after the battle was over, somebody buried them and put them in 3 big graves, presumably. The grave pits are described by Leland in 1540s. In the churchyard were many of the bones of the men that were killed on Palm Sunday field buried. They lay before in 5 pits, yet appearing half a mile by North Saxton Field. So in Leland's time, they'd excavated the bones and they'd left the pits open, so that you could still go up there and see them. All these graves are still open. But they hadn't removed all the human remains. They'd taken the skulls and the long bones out and left all the bits and pieces behind. The mass graves had already been exhumed in 1484, but they had left some behind, some of the bones behind. So they hadn't done a very successful job. So, the graves, now we know where they are. Did they know where they were? Well, before they backfilled them, they obviously knew where they were because there were huge big pits in the landscape. What happened after they backfilled them and started to plough them? Well, in 1857, Brooke again says the following. Following the depression or valley to the eastwards, the route shown abdotted there, and in the corner of the second field from the public road, there was until within about the last 12 or 13 years a square space enclosed with an embankment containing about half an acre. It was not usually ploughed, but in grass, and was said to have been a place of interment of many of the corpses after the battle. It lay on the corner of the North Acres, or North Acre Field at the southwards, but the embankment is now thrown down and the land has been ploughed. According to tradition, the greatest slaughter took place at or near North Acres. So by this time they've started to plough the ground. So they fill the pits in, but the memory existed that that's where the graves were. So the tradition was still there. That is where we found the arrowheads. That is where Lord Dacre's tree is. What does Lord Dacre's tree mean? It almost certainly marks the location of some sort of memorial that was there when they put the graves there. And if you go to Thisbe today, the graves are still there and the memorial is still in exactly the same place. It marks the area where the mass graves were. So I suggest that Lord Dacre's tree, apart from being a legend, is actually a grave marker for the graves for the Battle of Towton. Now in 1889, Ledman drew this map, and it's slightly different to Brooks' map from 1857, because not only does he highlight this space, and we'll go on to that in a minute, that's the site of the tumuli that was supposedly there, he highlights this place, which is, he calls them the site of the graves from the Battle of Towton. Now this landscape is now devoid of anything, and you can walk over there and there's not a sign of anything. But in Ledman's time, he suggested that that was the site of the grave. So we went and did a geophysical survey across this very area, and guess what? He was right. There's an enclosure there. And this is in a different place to our graves. So is this another graves, or is this an enclosure that was there at the time that Ledman drew this map? Because he said this is gone. So it was even his memory, or somebody else's memory, that highlighted that square in that landscape there. And here's Ledman's map. That's moved, annoyingly again. But that highlights the site of the graves. And that's moved as well. But that's where our graves were, and basically it should be slightly further right. As you can see, they're very close, but they're not the same, are they? They're just not the same. So all those bones, all those burials, all those arrowheads are in the landscape, but they refer to a group of graves that were emptied in 1484 and taken somewhere. So where did they go? They allegedly went there, into Saxton churchyard. Great numbers of the slain were interred in Saxton churchyard in a large trench or pit on the north side of the church. Their bones were exposed to view, lying about 4 feet below the surface, in making a vault not many years ago, and again subsequently in making another in 1848. That's Brooks saying. So the sexton, the people are digging new graves and coming across vast quantities of human bones in the churchyard. And that's there on the north side of the church. That's where you put alternative graves, on the north side of a graveyard. You don't put them in the primary area. Anything untowards, even the children, go on the north side of the churchyard, usually. So I've just done that. So this is Lord Dacre's tomb, and that's what it says approximately on Lord Dacre's tomb, in Latin, abbreviated. And it says basically, here lies Lord Dacre of Gilsland. But it says, here lies. That's why they call it a tomb. I would argue it's not a tomb. Why? One of the most commonly quoted works for Leland is John Leland in 1540 is Lord Dacre, the Lord Dacre slain in Towton Field is buried in Saxton churchyard and has a mean tomb. He calls it a tomb. And it says, here lies Randolph Lord Dacre. Now there's a lot of questions that pop up from this, and I thought I'd just highlight some to show you how you need to think about all of these. Why was the body of Lord Dacre not returned home? Virtually every other single aristocrat was taken home to his family seat and put in a big effigy of a tomb. Why not Dacre? Why was he buried outside the church? You could have at least given him the dignity of putting him inside the church if he's a leading Lancashire noble. Why was he put outside the church? It doesn't make any sense. Why was he buried on the north side of the graveyard? It's about the worst part of the graveyard he could be buried in. So somebody did not want this chap to be buried in the right place, if that's what it is. Why was he not buried inside near the altar like any leading high-ranking member of society was? They were always put inside as near to the altar as possible. Why not Lord Dacre? Why is his tomb a plain limestone and not alabaster? You go to anywhere and you usually get a very beautiful tomb, usually with an effigy on top. Why not Dacre? He's made out of limestone with a brief inscription round him. He obviously didn't think much of it, if that's what it is. Who buried him and when? Was he buried in 1461? I would argue not. Was he buried at the same time as the bones from the exhumation? Right. 1484, 20 odd years after, we're taking a lot of human bones from the battlefield and we're putting them into Saxon churchyard right next to Lord Dacre's tomb. How would they know it's Lord Dacre? Do they know it's Lord Dacre? Is that why they're not identifying him and giving him a marble tomb or an alabaster tomb? Is he downgraded because it's not what we perceive as a proper tomb? Was he buried immediately after the battle? In which case, if they knew who he was, why didn't they take him home and all that line of thought? Was he reburied with the bones from the 1484 exhumation from the middle of the battlefield? I would argue that he was. In which case, it's 20 odd years later. How do you identify him? Why isn't he getting a proper tomb? It all starts to fit together. Was he buried after 1484 by Yorkists or after 1485 by Lancashrians? Why would the Yorkists bury him in a leading Lancashrian in 1461 and give him a tomb? You could argue that he was buried after 1485 because the Tudors, or the Lancashrian section of that family, are now in charge with Henry VII again. So who's burying him otherwise? Was there ever a body actually in the tomb? Archaeologically, the evidence is no, there wasn't, because that tomb has been exhumed a couple of times for burying Gascoigne, I think it was, somebody might be able to tell me, and they've not found a body. Is this a tomb or a later memorial to mark the approximate location of where he was buried, where all of the combatants were buried, in that mass grave right next to where Lord Dacre's tomb is? Is Lord Dacre's tomb a memorial to all of the bodies that were put on there back in there in 1484 or slightly later? I would argue that there's more evidence for that than there is for Lord Dacre. And unless someone's going to go and dig him up, you can't prove me wrong. Maybe one day in the future, you never know. But in 2012, we went and did, you mentioned this before, we did a programme for Inside Out, and we went to do a light survey on the top of Lord Dacre's tomb to see what the inscription actually said. And most of it is virtually gone. So it's only by raking light over it, you can actually see any indentation. And what we came up with was that. And that is what remains of the inscription around the top of Dacre's tomb. You can't actually read it, but you can compare with text evidence from what other people said it reads, and that's basically correct, with a few caveats. So that's Dacre's tomb. That is another piece of limestone from a church near me that bears a remarkable resemblance to Dacre's tomb. It's got the double script on the bottom, it's not black letter, it's slightly later post-medieval script, but it's basically very, very similar. Made of limestone, it was standing outside until somebody rescued it. It's even broken in half, and somebody's repaired it, just like Lord Dacre's tomb. So is this one, Lord Dacre's tomb, from 1461 or from post-1485? Because this one was dated 1532, significantly later. So, not exactly proof, but it makes you think. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find, you can all help me on this, I'm trying to find a medieval tomb that looks like Lord Dacre's, especially around York area, because ideally it would be nice to find somebody or something that's very, very similar, or more so. And in the 19th century, Lord Dacre's tomb, which used to look like this one, bottom left, was broken in half, and it was actually falling into its own hole. You see that? It's falling into a hole to the left. And then it was renovated in the 1880s, and it looked like that. That's our survey. So where were the bones exhumed from the battlefield reburied? Is this a tomb or simply a later memorial? Because I would argue that there's a very good chance that that's where not only the bones from the battlefield are buried, but I think Lord Dacre is amongst them, and that's not a tomb. He's in with all the other bones, and that's why that tomb looks like that in that location. That answers all the questions about that, the ones I answered before. So going on to other anomalies. I think we've got a bit of time left, I hope so. Near the end anyway. So on Ledman's map I highlighted before, has that moved as well? Oh, not quite. He highlights the site of the tumuli in the bottom left-hand corner there. And he marks them as 5 dots. And it's even marked on more modern Ordnance Survey maps as the site of the tumuli, and that's connected with the Battle of Towton. Oops. So that's the actual location. You see it's on the left-hand side of the road going towards between Saxton and Towton. So our mass graves are there, where it says North Acre. So they're on the wrong side of the road. Or are these another set of graves? So, as we do, we took that landscape, that field, and we did a geophysical survey over it. And there's very little there. But there are traces of later ridge and furrow cultivation in that location. So is that the site of A graves, or has somebody got it wrong? Well, I think I might be able to explain why they got it wrong, because this is the site of what people thought were the graves. The grave pits, as described by Leland in 1540, in the churchyard where many of the bones of the men that killed in Battle of Towton were buried, they lay afore in 5 pits. 5 pits marked on the map. Jeffreys showed them as rectangular trenches in his 18th century map. On the other version of his map, I think that's early, isn't it? Yeah, it's early. On both occasions, he draws them as rectangular trenches. On the Carey map, or Carey map of 1805, they're remarkably transformed from rectangular trenches into pits. And there's 5 of them. Why? Because that's where everybody said there were 5 pits. Because that's the historical documentation coming through. In the 1849 OS map, they changed sides of the road. Why on earth did the Ordnance Survey move the graves to the other side of the road? Or are there graves there? Well, we can't find any evidence of them. Why on earth would somebody do that? I think I've got an answer. Because that's where, the middle one, hang on, that's not it. That's where the Ordnance Survey put the site of these 5 pits. Why on earth had they done that? Why would they move them? The most often used quote regarding the graves the Harleian manuscripts from the 17th century. Certain deep trenches overgrown with bushes and briars containing 19 yards in breadth, 32 yards in length in Towton Field, a bow shot on the left in the way between Saxton and Towton, half a mile short of Saxton. That puts them on the left-hand side of the road. That document is actually wrong, because it should say this. This is the original document. The graves near Saxton are certain deep trenches overgrown with bushes and briars containing 19 yards in breadth and 32 yards in length. In Towton Field, 3 bow shot, not 1, on the left hand in the way between Sherburn and Towton, not Saxton. This puts those graves exactly where we found them. Just to show you in map form, that's where the Ordnance Survey said they are. That location there. This is where Leadman thought it was, so at least he was on the right track, but he thought it was that other enclosure further up the road. Now we know it's not there, it's there. So now we know how things get manipulated and moved around because somebody's done a bad translation or they've got the wrong documents from somewhere. And this perpetuates until somebody like me comes along and goes, excuse me, I think you're wrong. Or Paul or whoever turns up, and unless you question the data, it stays that way. And that's the problem with battlefields around the world. I can't go without mentioning this thing, can I? Right, Richard III's chapel. Everybody tells you where it is because of this quote. Towton Village is a mile from Saxton where a great chapel began by Richard III but not finished. Sir John Moulton, or Nelson, father, laid the first stone of it. That's very specific. It's telling you who actually started, getting the dignitary, excuse me, would you lay the foundation stone? A presto, there you go. That suggests something is a bit stronger than a legend in the mind. So where is it? In 1998 we started digging in the front garden of Towton Hall. And that circle's moved as well, so this is going to be really funny. In 1999, it wasn't there, that shows the top of Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill is named after the chapel. There's nothing on the top of Chapel Hill, no structure whatsoever. So in 2014 we went back to the front garden and checked there, and in 2025 we went and checked there, and we still cannot find evidence of this chapel. In 2025 we went into the back garden and we did some test pits and some more geophysics. Where is he? He's hiding over there. Richard helped me do some more geophysics. No sign of any chapel there, even though Richard dug a huge hole trying to find it. And in 2026 we're going back because we're not giving up yet. And we're going back into the front garden because there are areas we have not dug big holes in. But this is from the 2025 excavation, and there were walls. We found walls, and one of them is a medieval wall. And it didn't do anything like go around a corner or produce an angle like a building. This is a very straight wall in a very straight line. And it looks like a boundary wall. And it's covered in other walls that look like boundary walls. And so at the moment, there is still no chapel, which is very, very frustrating. Because that's where we found the mass grave in 1996, so it's very, very close. So in 2026, 30 years later, we're going to go and dig a hole there, because they're taking this tree down there, right in amongst all the graves. So hopefully we get a chance to find something, even if it's only more graves. As a conclusion, by targeting the areas of interest, the project has produced real facts related to interpretations of at least one part of the battle, where it was fought, where people died, and where and how they were buried, with some even exhumed and moved somewhere else. Project work has also prompted a reappraisal of what we initially thought we knew about the Battle of Towton. This is the real value of battlefield archaeology, to find facts in a sea of uncertainty, fiction and misinterpretation. Or to use the terminology of today, I like this, it's called fact-checking, basically.